Good day, everyone. Today, I will be discussing the importance of English as a second language or ESL in strengthening literacy across the K 12 curriculum. As a future elementary teachers, it is important for us to understand that teaching English is not simply about teaching vocabulary, grammar, or memorizing words. We also need to help learners use English to understand information, express their ideas, communicate with others, and learn in different subject areas. In this discussion, we will look at how ESL contributes to the development of different literacy skills. But before we proceed, let me ask you a question. If you are given an English story, what would you do to understand its meaning? Of course, you would probably read the story carefully. You might also look for unfamiliar words, use the context of the story, or connect the information to what you already know. This shows that reading is not just about recognizing words. We need to understand the message behind those words. For example, if a learner can pronounce every word in an English story but cannot explain what the story means, then the learner can read the words but may not fully understand the text. So, this brings us to the importance of reading comprehension. Now, imagine that you have an idea that you want to share with your classmates, but you need to write it in an English paragraph. What skills do you need? Yes, you need the writing skills. Writing allows learners to organize their thoughts and communicate their ideas through sentences and paragraphs. For example, if a student wants to explain what happened during a school activity, the student needs vocabulary and sentence construction skills to clearly express the experience. This means that learning English should also help students become confident in expressing their own ideas, not simply copying sentences from a book. Another situation. Your teacher gives you instructions in English. What should you be able to do? You should be able to listen and understand the instructions. For example, if the teacher says, "Open your notebook, write the date, and answer number 1 to 5," students need to understand the message before they can perform the task correctly. This shows that listening is also an important part of literacy. So when we teach ESL, we should not focus on only one skill. Learners need opportunities to practice different language skills together. Now this leads us to an important question. Why do learners need all four skills instead of only one? The four skills are reading, writing, speaking, and listening. These skills are connected. For example, a student may listen to a teacher's explanation, understand it, discuss the idea through speaking, read additional information about it, and finally write an answer of reflection. So, imagine if one of these skills is weak, it can affect the learner's ability to communicate and participate in learning activities. That is why ESL should develop these skills together. The goal is not simply for students to know English, but to use English effectively in real learning situations. So this is our objectives for this lesson. Now, let us proceed to our main topic. Why is ESL important in strengthening literacy across K to 12? In the Philippine educational setting, learners encounter English in many learning situations. They may read English texts, listen to English instructions, answer questions in English, and use English learning materials. Because of this, English literacy can affect how learners understand and participate in their education. For example, if a learner has difficulty understanding English instructions, the learner may also have difficulty completing an activity even if the learner actually understands the lesson. Therefore, strengthening ESL literacy can help learners become more capable and confident in different academic situations. So, what exactly do we mean by English as a second language or ESL? Simply put, ESL refers to the teaching and learning of English for learners whose first or home language is not English. This is important in the Philippine context because many Filipino learners grow up using a local language or Filipino at home while encountering English in school. For example, a learner may speak Cebuano at home, Filipino in other situations, and English during certain classroom activities. Now let us talk about the role of ESL in Philippine education. English is used in different parts of the learning process. It can be used when teachers provide classroom instructions. It can also appear in learning materials and assessments. For example, students may encounter English instructions in an activity sheet, read an English passage in textbook, or answer questions that require them to understand English. This means that English literacy can support learners not only in English class but also in their overall academic learning. We have five major ideas that explain how ESL supports literacy. These include reading and reading comprehension, vocabulary and writing, speaking and listening, learning across subjects, and critical thinking and information literacy. Instead of simply memorizing these five areas, let us understand how they are connected. Let us briefly discuss each one. First is reading and reading comprehension. Reading comprehension means that learners do not only recognize or pronounce the words, they also understand and interpret what they are reading. For example, after reading a short story, a learner should be able to explain what happened, identify the important ideas, and answer questions about the text. This is important because students encounter many written materials in school. If learners can read but cannot understand the meaning, their learning can still be affected. Therefore, ESL instruction should also help learners move from simply reading words to actually understanding the text. The second is vocabulary and writing. Vocabulary is important because learners need words to express what they think and understand. Imagine a student who has a good idea but does not know the English words needed to explain it. The student may have difficulty communicating that idea. That is why vocabulary development supports writing. As learners learn more useful English words, they can gradually express their thoughts more clearly through sentences and paragraphs. For teachers, this means that vocabulary should not be taught only through memorization. We can also introduce words through stories, classroom activities, conversations, and situations that learners can understand. The next important area is speaking and listening. Speaking allows learners to express their ideas, answer questions, participate in discussions, and communicate with other people. Listening, on the other hand, helps learners understand what teachers and classmates are saying. These two skills work together. A learner needs to listen before responding, and speaking allows the learner to communicate what they understand. ESL also supports learning across different subjects. English is not only useful in English class. Learners may encounter English terms, instructions, and learning materials in other subject area as well. For example, in science, learners may need to understand English term and instructions to complete an activity. In mathematics, they may need to understand an English word problem before solving it. So, the main idea here is that English literacy is not an isolated skill. It supports communication and learning in many areas of education. That ends of my discussion. Thank you.